My name is David Parker, and I'll never forget the moment my own daughter looked me in the eye and said I was too old to fly with them to Hawaii. Too old while her in-laws older than me were welcomed with open arms. I was told to stay behind and watch the house, the very home they already whispered about, as their inheritance. They thought they had me cornered, ready to push me into a nursing home and sell my house without a second thought. But what they didn't know was that I had my own plan, one that would change everything and leave them begging for my attention. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. You're too old to travel with us. Those words from my daughter cut deeper than any knife. I sat there in my own living room, brochures about Hawaii scattered across the coffee table, listening as Lauren dismissed me as if I were a piece of old furniture taking up space. For years, I had sheltered her and her family in my home, paid their bills when they couldn't, and cooked meals that went largely unappreciated. And yet, when the chance for joy and adventure came, I was told to stay behind and watch the house. Bradley's parents, Walter and Margaret, lounged on my sofa like they owned the place. Walter puffed up his chest, bragging about sunsets he hadn't even seen yet, while Margaret rattled on about snorkeling excursions. They were planning their dream trip as if it were a reward for endurance. And all the while, I sat there excluded from a celebration that my late wife, Sarah, would have insisted included me. Sarah believed family was all or none. She would have never stood for this divide. Lauren's hand brushed away the glossy brochure. I reached for her voice, light but sharp. You'll be better off staying here, Dad. Just take care of the house for us. The sting wasn't only in her words, but in her tone, casual, dismissive, as if my usefulness began and ended with providing a roof. My heart clenched, not from age, but from the coldness of a child I had once rocked to sleep. Bradley shrugged with that careless smile I'd come to know too well. Maybe next time, Pops, he said, as if there would be a next time, as if I hadn't just been erased from my own family's joy. Their laughter echoed around the room, a cruel chorus of people who saw me not as a father, not as a man, but as a burden to be managed. I forced a smile, though every muscle in my face trembled with the weight of restraint. Inside, I was burning. They spoke of ocean views and helicopter rides, and I sat silent, remembering the swing set I'd built for my grandchildren, the thousands of dollars I'd poured into keeping their lives afloat. Gratitude had turned into entitlement, and entitlement had rotted into disrespect. In that moment, humiliation wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. Yet beneath it, something stirred, a resolve I hadn't felt since Sarah's passing. They thought I was too old, too weak, too gullible to see what was happening right in front of me. They believed they were clever, planning their paradise while leaving me behind to tend to their so-called inheritance. But they had miscalculated. I may have been 62, but I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Tell me, have you ever been cast aside by those you love, treated as if you were invisible in your own home? What would you have done if it were you in my place? They laughed in my own living room. That sound still rattles in my chest whenever I think about it. Walter lifted his coffee mug in a mock toast. Bradley chuckled along, and even Margaret, who had barely known me, joined in as though I were the punchline of some private family joke. My own daughter Lauren beamed with satisfaction. The Hawaii trip wasn't just a vacation, it was their way of showing me I no longer belonged. I sat rigid in my chair, nodding occasionally, trying to appear unaffected, while inside I was unraveling. The hardwood floor creaked under their movements, the same floor where Sarah and I had danced on our 30th anniversary. That memory had always brought warmth, but that night it brought only a sharp contrast, reminding me of what real family once felt like compared to the scene unfolding before me. Dad, you'll love the peace and quiet, Lauren said, her smile wide rehearsed. No noise, no responsibilities, just you in the house. She framed it as though she were doing me a favor, as if stripping me from the very definition of family togetherness was a gift. Bradley chimed in, "You can even catch up on your shows. We'll be back before you know it." His voice dripped with condescension, and the others laughed again. Each word landed like a stone in my gut. Peace and quiet, I had been living with their chaos for 5 years. Their children ran through my halls, their arguments filled my evenings, their bills drained my pension. And now suddenly, I was supposed to embrace silence, as though it were some rare treasure they were offering. No, this wasn't generosity. It was exclusion dressed up as kindness. I forced myself to glance around the room at the glossy brochures, the luggage lists, the giddy smiles on faces that had long since forgotten gratitude. I saw not family, but tenants who believed they were landlords, guests who mistook themselves for heirs. Their laughter swelled again, echoing like nails on glass. That's when I realized humiliation wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how comfortable they were doing it. They didn't just exclude me, they believed I would accept it. Inside, anger churned, not wild and reckless, but controlled and deliberate. Years of teaching algebra had given me patience, discipline, and an eye for calculation. I knew how to wait, how to listen, how to let overconfidence expose weakness. And as their laughter rolled over me, I felt the first spark of something colder than rage resolve. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't shout or demand answers. I simply smiled, offered a polite good night, and climbed the stairs as though I were retreating. But in truth, I was advancing. Every laugh, every smirk, every dismissive word was fuel. They thought they had silenced me, but they had only awakened something I hadn't felt in years. Have you ever sat quietly in a room pretending to agree, while every fiber of your being screamed to act? That was me in that moment, silent but already planning. Through the vent, I heard the truth. It was late, the house settling into its nighttime quiet, when voices drifted up through the heating vent near my bed. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then Bradley's laugh pierced the silence. Honestly think he bought that whole too old nonsense. My hand froze on the book I'd been pretending to read. Then came Lauren's voice, casual and cruel. Dad's always been gullible. Remember when we told him we'd pay him back for the roof repairs he never even asked again? Their laughter followed, muffled but sharp enough to cut through me. Each word was a hammer driving home a truth I didn't want to face. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as an easy mark, a man too weak to stand up for himself. I leaned closer to the vent, my heart pounding in my chest, like a drum. Walter's voice joined the chorus, perfect timing too. Right after we get back from Hawaii, we put him in that nursing home we researched. My breath caught. Margaret added matter-of-factly, Sunset Manor said they could expedite the paperwork if we pay the deposit up front. $3,000 is nothing compared to what we'll get from this house. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the windowsill, the words "this house" ringing in my ears. They weren't planning for me. They were planning for my absence. They were already divvying up a future without me in it. Lauren's voice rose again, bright with calculation. Zachary Allen says the market's hot. We could get 800,000, maybe more. Split 4 ways, it'll set us up for life. Bradley asked 4 ways, and Lauren snapped, "Of course. You, me, Mom, and Dad. They've dealt with his whining long enough. They deserve their share." I sank back onto the edge of my bed, my body heavy, my mind spinning. 5 years of housing them, paying for groceries, repairing cars, covering medical bills. Over $60,000 in expenses, all while they called me demanding and entitled behind my back. The betrayal burned, not just because it was cruel, but because it was deliberate. They'd made plans, done research, contacted agents, all while smiling at me across the dinner table. I stared at Sarah's old vanity mirror, my reflection staring back at me. For a moment, I barely recognized the man looking back. He seemed older, worn down, invisible. But then, as their laughter faded into another room, something shifted. My eyes hardened, my shoulders squared. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. They thought I was too old, too weak, too trusting to notice. But what they had forgotten was that I had spent 40 years teaching kids who thought they could outsmart me. I had caught cheaters, liars, and schemers more clever than Bradley ever dreamed of being. If they wanted to play games, I was prepared to show them just how dangerous an old math teacher could be. Have you ever overheard someone you love plotting against you, only to realize you've been the fool all along? That moment doesn't break you, it forges you. The word that froze my blood nursing home. I had heard insults before, endured their careless remarks and patronizing smiles, but nothing compared to hearing my own daughter calmly discuss where she would deposit me like some broken piece of furniture. Sunset Manor, that was the name Margaret spoke with such clinical detachment. As if she were booking a spa appointment, not orchestrating her father's exile. I sat motionless, straining to catch every word through the vent. Once he's there, the house becomes ours anyway. Walter said, his voice low but certain. My heart pounded so hard, I could feel it in my throat. Ours. They had claimed ownership of a home I'd built, with Sarah paid off, with decades of sweat and sacrifice. To them, it wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was just real estate waiting to be liquidated. Lauren's voice carried the arrogance of someone who had already won. I contacted Zachary Allen. He's confident we can list it fast. 800,000, maybe more if we move quickly. I knew Zachary at least by reputation. A local realtor with a knack for quick deals. My stomach turned. They hadn't just fantasized about my absence. They had made concrete steps to erase me. Bradley chimed in, split 4 ways right. That'll give us a strong cushion. Lauren didn't hesitate. Exactly. And Mom and Dad deserve their cut after everything they've put up with. Dad will have professional care, and we'll have security. The entitlement in her tone was worse than any knife. My generosity had been twisted into a burden, my presence reframed as a liability. I pressed my palms into my thighs, the pressure grounding me as the conversation continued. Margaret laughed softly. He has gotten demanding lately, always asking about our plans, wanting to be included in everything. Walter added, the entitlement is unreal. The irony nearly made me choke. Entitlement, I had given them 5 years of shelter, food, and stability, while they contributed nothing but excuses. And yet somehow in their minds, I was the one who took too much. The betrayal was a weight pressing down on my chest, but beneath it a spark ignited. Their words should have broken me, but instead they sharpened me. Every detail they revealed was a gift, evidence of their schemes, proof of their arrogance. They thought I was asleep upstairs, oblivious to their plotting. Instead, I was memorizing every move, every name, every plan they so carelessly laid out. I looked again into Sarah's mirror, and for the first time in years, I saw more than a tired widower. I saw a man with purpose, a man who still had fight left in him. Sarah would not have allowed them to discard me like trash, and I would not dishonor her memory by letting it happen. They wanted me in Sunset Manor. They wanted my house. They wanted me gone. But what they didn't realize was that by speaking their intentions aloud, they had given me the weapon I needed: knowledge. And knowledge in the right hands can be devastating. So tell me if you overheard your own children planning to take everything from you. Would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait and let them taste the full weight of their betrayal? I wasn't invisible anymore. That thought echoed in my head as I sat alone in my bedroom, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the heating vent that had delivered the truth. For years, I had convinced myself that silence was strength, that providing without complaint would earn me love, gratitude, and respect. But the laughter I overheard proved I was wrong. To them, my silence meant weakness. My sacrifices had become the soil in which their entitlement grew. I opened Sarah's jewelry box, the one I had guarded since the day she passed. Beneath her wedding ring lay the deed to the house. My hands trembled as I lifted it out not from frailty, but from the weight of realization. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the symbol of everything I had worked for, everything they believed was already theirs. They thought they could strip it from me with forged concern and legal trickery. But as I held it in my hands, I knew they would never take it without a fight. I sat at the vanity staring at my reflection. The man in the mirror was no longer the passive father waiting for scraps of kindness from his own daughter. He was a man who had spent 40 years teaching lessons, some with chalk on a blackboard, others with quiet correction in the classroom. Now it was time to teach a different kind of lesson, one my family would never forget. Their plan was simple: ship me off to a nursing home, cash out the house, and divide the profits. But what they didn't realize was that I was already 3 steps ahead. I had listened, I had learned, and now I was ready to act. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissive laugh had given me clarity. I no longer felt humiliation. I felt purpose. I tucked the deed back into its box and placed it in the bottom drawer of my dresser. My mind worked with the precision of algebra, each variable falling into place. Timing, execution, outcome, all could be calculated. Tomorrow, while they packed sunscreen and snorkels, I would begin packing something else: resolve. I imagined the look on Lauren's face when she returned, expecting to find me compliant, only to discover that her father had rewritten the ending to her story. I imagined Bradley's outrage when he realized his easy ride had ended, and Walter and Margaret, so smug in their certainty, would be left speechless when they realized they had underestimated the very man they mocked. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For the first time in years, I felt light, not because my burden was gone, but because I was ready to lay it down on my own terms. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my kindness for stupidity. That miscalculation would be their downfall. So I ask you, when someone you love crosses the line and betrays your trust so deeply, do you strike back immediately, or do you wait, plan, and let the lesson cut even deeper when it finally lands? The morning after, I smiled at their excitement. They bustled around the kitchen, buzzing with energy, flipping through boarding passes and travel itineraries. Lauren's voice rang out crisp and confident: "Flight leaves at 10:15, so we'll head out by 8:30. Dad, just make sure to water the plants and check the mail while we're gone." Her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind people use when speaking to a child who doesn't know better. I stirred sugar into my coffee, slowly letting the steam rise into my face, masking the calm that was beginning to harden into steel. Bradley hunched over his phone, bragging about their ocean view suite. Walter compared brands of sunscreen with Margaret like soldiers strategizing for war. They moved like a unit, efficient and sure of themselves. Not once did anyone glance my way to see how I felt about being left behind. If only they knew. I nodded politely, feigning gratitude for my vacation at home. "Sounds wonderful," I said, as if I were still the gullible old man they'd mocked the night before. Inside, though, my mind was racing. Their plans to enjoy paradise were my opportunity to secure freedom. They thought they had 10 safe days, but in truth, I only needed half that time. Bradley finally looked up, smirking. Pops don't touch anything important, all right. Call a pro if something breaks. His words dripped with the irony of a man who had never fixed a thing in his life. I forced a chuckle and raised my mug. Of course, son. Wouldn't want to make a mess of things. They laughed, satisfied that I was playing my role, the obedient, docile father. But in reality, I had already begun rehearsing the lines to a different play, one where I would no longer be their prop. As I sipped my coffee, I replayed their conversation from the night before. Sunset Manor, Zachary Allen, nursing home deposits, and real estate valuations. They believed their victory was certain because they thought I was ignorant. But Sarah used to say, "The quietest person in the room often sees the most." I had seen enough. They packed their suitcases with giddy chatter, tossing in sunglasses and swimsuits. I packed something else in my heart, a silent vow that by the time they returned, their paradise would turn to ashes. Every laugh they'd shared at my expense had sharpened me. Every dismissive word had carved clarity into my mind. I stood to help them load the car, my smile steady, my steps measured. Lauren kissed my cheek, a gesture that once would have melted me. Now it felt like the closing act of a performance I had seen too many times. "We'll bring you back something," she said. I simply nodded, knowing that what I would bring back to them was not a souvenir, but a lesson. "Tell me, if you had 10 days to turn betrayal into justice, what would you do first?" I drove them to the airport. That in itself was the most satisfying performance I had ever given. Bradley had fumbled with Lauren's oversized suitcase, muttering about the Uber that had canceled last minute. I stepped in without hesitation. "Perfect timing," I said, jingling my car keys. "I'll drive you. It's the least I can do." They cheered as though I had saved the day, blind to the fact that this would be my last act of compliance. The 45-minute drive was thick with their chatter. Margaret gushed about the helicopter tour she'd already booked. Walter mused about Hawaiian sunsets, his voice full of anticipation. Bradley bragged about how this trip would finally give him the relaxation he deserved. And Lauren, my daughter, laughed along her tone, dripping with entitlement, as if she were already living in the paradise they planned to inherit. I gripped the wheel, nodding at the right moments, even managing a chuckle here and there. They thought I was nothing more than their chauffeur. But with every mile we drove, my plan was gaining momentum. When we pulled up to Orlando International, Bradley clapped me on the shoulder. "Thanks, Pops, you're a lifesaver." Margaret hugged me as if I were some kindly relative seeing them off on a grand adventure. Even Lauren leaned in with a quick kiss on my cheek. "Don't overwork yourself, Dad. Just relax while we're gone." Her words nearly made me laugh. Relax. If only she knew how busy I was about to be. I watched them vanish into the terminal, their bright luggage rolling behind them, their heads high with anticipation. As the automatic doors closed, I finally exhaled a slow breath that carried 5 years of frustration with it. The weight of their presence was gone. For the first time in years, my house and my life belonged solely to me. I slid back into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my back, and let the silence settle around me. No laughter, no condescension, just quiet. And in that quiet, my resolve crystallized. I wasn't just going to defend what was mine. I was going to show them what it meant to underestimate the man they thought was too old to matter. By 11:00 a.m., I was back at the house. Their brochures still littered the table, their empty coffee mugs sat abandoned in the sink. I ignored them all and walked straight to the drawer where I had tucked Sarah's jewelry box. Inside was the deed proof of ownership, proof of my independence. I slipped it into a folder along with tax records and insurance papers. Then I reached for the phone. The number came easily to me, Zachary Allen, the very realtor Lauren had bragged about contacting. I dialed steady and sure. "Mr. Allen," I said when he answered, "this is David Parker. I need to sell my house. Fast." There was a pause on the line, then his voice brightened with interest. "How fast are we talking, Mr. Parker?" 2 weeks, I replied. "Maybe less." "So tell me, if your own family plotted to sell your home behind your back, would you confront them face to face, or would you let the paperwork do the talking?" Aggressive pricing for aggressive betrayal. That's what I told myself as I sat across from Zachary Allen in my living room, the very space where my daughter had laughed about my supposed gullibility. Zachary was younger than I expected, mid-40s, sharp navy blazer, and eyes that scanned the house like a hawk. He clicked his pen, ready to jot down every detail. "2 weeks is ambitious," he said, flipping open his tablet. "But if you're willing to price aggressively, we could attract cash buyers who'll move quickly. No contingencies, minimal fuss." I slid the folder across the table. Inside were the deed tax records and proof of clear title. "This house is mine, free and clear. No mortgage. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, new roof, 5 years ago, updated kitchen. Square footage, 2,800. His eyebrows lifted. "That makes things easier. No lenders means speed. But I need to be clear, speed costs money. You'll likely sell for less than top market value." I leaned back, folding my arms. "Money is not the only currency here, Mr. Allen. Sometimes time and certainty are worth more than a padded price tag." My voice was steady, but inside I was fueled by every insult I'd heard through that vent. They thought I was too old to handle my own affairs. They thought they could control the timeline. They were about to learn otherwise. Zachary tapped on his tablet, calculating numbers. "If we list at 840, we could wait weeks. If you're serious about moving quickly, I'd recommend setting it at 780 or even 770. That'll draw in investors." 770. A $60,000 discount from what Lauren had bragged about. I let the figure roll around in my head, heavy but bearable. The truth was, I had already spent more than that on supporting them: groceries, bills, car repairs, medical emergencies. Money lost to entitlement. What was another 60,000 if it bought me freedom, dignity, and revenge? "List it at 770, I said firmly. Zachary paused, searching my eyes, then nodded. "You're serious?" "Very." He walked the rooms, taking notes, snapping photos, praising the hardwood floors Sarah and I had restored together. Each click of his camera felt like a nail sealing my family's fate. I followed silently, my mind racing ahead. Soon, the house they thought was theirs would belong to someone else. And when they came back from their island paradise, they'd find strangers living in the home they once treated like a guaranteed inheritance. When Zachary packed up, he offered a handshake. "I'll start making calls tonight. Expect interest within 48 hours. As his car pulled away, I stood on the porch, the Florida sun beating down on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I was free yet, but because I was finally moving toward freedom. So let me ask you, would you sacrifice a little money if it meant teaching those who betrayed you the most expensive lesson of their lives? Surprise for surprise. That's what I told myself. When the phone rang late that evening, the area code unmistakably Hawaiian. I set aside Zachary's business card and answered. Dad Lauren's voice bubbled through the line, full of excitement. "We made it. The resort is incredible: private beach, infinity pool, helicopter tours, everything. You should see it." I pictured her on a balcony, the ocean behind her, the life of luxury she assumed I'd never know. I let my tone stay warm. "I'm glad you arrived safely. Be sure to take plenty of pictures. I'd love to see Hawaii through your eyes." She laughed. "We'll send postcards, but Dad, don't try to do too much around the house. Keep it simple, okay? We don't want you overexerting yourself." Her words dripped with the same condescension I'd heard the night before. Overexerting myself, I had just set in motion the fastest real estate deal of my life. I traced the edge of Zachary's folder with my finger, holding back a smile. "That's thoughtful of you, Lauren," I said. "Funny thing you mentioned having a surprise for me when you get back. Well, I've been working on a surprise of my own." There was a pause on the line. "A surprise? What kind of surprise could you possibly be planning, Dad?" Her laugh was light, but I heard the note of skepticism beneath it. "If I told you it wouldn't be a surprise," I said. "Let's just say I've been taking care of some important business while you're away. Something that'll change things for all of us." She hesitated, then chuckled. "Dad, you're retired. You don't need to worry about business. Just relax. Don't worry about me," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm handling everything perfectly." I imagined her shaking her head, writing off my words as harmless old man talk. That was fine. The less she suspected, the sweeter the reveal would be. We exchanged quick goodbyes, and I set the phone down on the table. The house was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Both of us were holding on to secrets, hers, a plan to lock me away and sell what she thought she owned. Mine, a plan to erase every trace of their entitlement in one decisive stroke. I leaned back in my chair, smiling faintly. She thought her nursing home scheme was clever. But what she didn't know was that her father had already flipped the script. So I'll ask you, when someone tells you they're planning a surprise that could destroy your life, would you confront them, or would you smile and prepare a bigger surprise of your own? Some lessons cost money. That was the thought running through my mind as I sat at the kitchen table staring at Zachary's card and the preliminary numbers he had left behind. My daughter was sipping cocktails on a Hawaiian beach, convinced she was outmaneuvering me, while I was deciding just how much I was willing to sacrifice to make sure she learned the hardest lesson of her life. By Monday, Zachary had a buyer lined up, James Clark, a property investor who paid cash and moved fast. We toured the house together, Clark's practiced eyes scanning every detail. "Good bones," he said, tapping a wall. "Rental potential is strong, but at your current price, the margins don't work. I'd need $60,000 off to move forward." $60,000. The exact number I had calculated when I tallied 5 years of groceries bills and repairs I had sunk into supporting Lauren's family. The universe had an odd way of balancing the books. Clark extended his hand. "I'll give you 48 hours to decide." That night, I paced the empty living room, Sarah's photograph watching me from the mantel. Could I really give up that much money? Was my revenge worth the cost? I thought about Lauren's laughter, about Bradley boasting through the vent, about Walter and Margaret casually discussing my nursing home placement. I remembered how they had planned to slice up my home like a pie before I was even gone. The answer came easy, yes. Every penny I spent on them had been wasted. This wasn't a loss, it was an investment in dignity. I called Zachary the next morning. "Tell Clark I'll take the deal. Cash. Fast, close. Let's end this before they even set foot back in Florida." Zachary hesitated. "Are you sure, Mr. Parker? We might find someone willing to pay more if you wait." "I've already waited too long," I replied. Speed is what matters. Within hours, the paperwork was moving. Title search, closing schedule, cash escrow. Clark's urgency aligned perfectly with mine, and in a twist I couldn't have scripted better, his firm even sweetened the deal, offering $10,000 more to guarantee a 7-day close. Fate was on my side. I leaned back in my chair, letting the relief wash over me. My family thought they had locked me into a role, the aging father too feeble to resist. But while they lounged in luxury, I was stripping them of the very prize they coveted. When they returned, they would discover that the house they called theirs belonged to strangers, and their inheritance had vanished. So tell me, if you had to choose between keeping every dollar or teaching a betrayal that money can't excuse, which would you choose? Voicemails turned ugly fast. That's how I knew my plan was working. The first few calls from Lauren came with her usual commanding tone, sharp, entitled "The Voice of a Woman Who Thought She Still Held the Reins." "Dad, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't funny. Call me back immediately." She had no idea the game was over before she even realized it had begun. By the 10th voicemail, the anger had spread to Bradley. His words were venomous, his voice raised to a near shout. "This is insane, David. You can't just sell our house without telling us. We're getting lawyers involved." The irony made me laugh out loud. Our house. The deed had never carried their names, never once. They had mistaken 5 years of generosity for permanent ownership. I scrolled through my phone as the messages stacked up: 12, 15, 20. Margaret's voice cracked with tears in one of them. "Please, David, we don't understand what's happening. Where are you? We need to talk." Walter's tone was less pleading, more baffled. "This doesn't make sense. Just call us. We can sort this out." But I didn't call. I let the phone buzz ring and hum itself into exhaustion on the counter. I had spent years answering every one of their calls for help, every emergency, every crisis they had created. Now they could sit in the silence of their own making. Meanwhile, I imagined them standing in front of my old house, faces twisted in disbelief as strangers opened the door. James Clark's company had wasted no time, new locks, fresh paint, tenants already touring the property. The look on Lauren's face when the new owners showed her the deed must have been priceless. My neighbor Elizabeth later told me she tried to barge inside, insisting it was her father's house. But the young couple living there now didn't hesitate to threaten police involvement if she didn't leave. Every call they made, every voicemail they left, was a testament to how quickly their confidence was crumbling. They had spent years laughing at my expense, smug in their control. Now the tables had turned, and they were the ones, desperate, powerless, voiceless. I poured myself a cup of coffee and carried it out onto the small balcony of my rented apartment. From there, I watched the Florida sunset, rich with gold and crimson. My phone buzzed again, voicemail number 21. I didn't even bother checking it. The desperation was enough. It struck me then, for 5 years, they had treated me like background noise, like an extra in their story. Now my silence was the loudest sound they had ever heard. So let me ask you, if you had the chance to let those who betrayed you drown in their own panic, would you answer their calls, or would you sit back and let silence teach the lesson words never could? "This isn't funny, Dad." Lauren's voice cracked through the latest voicemail, sharper than I'd ever heard it. Her tone had shifted from superiority to something raw fear. For years she had spoken to me as though she were the parent and I the child. Now that confidence had evaporated. By voicemail number 25, her commanding edge had dulled into pleading. "Dad, please just answer. We'll figure this out. You can't just disappear on us." The irony was rich. Disappear, that had been her plan for me all along. Sunset Manor, out of sight, out of mind. They wanted me gone, just not like this. I let her words play in the background as I sipped my coffee, savoring the silence between each frantic message. My phone screen filled with missed calls, the numbers climbing like a scoreboard, 31, 32, 33. Each one proof that control had slipped from their fingers. Bradley's fury seeped through next. "David, you've lost it. We'll call the cops. We'll sue. This is our home." His voice wavered as he said the word "our," as if even he knew it was a lie. The deed had never been theirs. They had confused comfort with ownership, entitlement with truth. Then came Margaret, her voice trembling. "Please, David, we don't have anywhere to go. The children are exhausted, and we don't know what to do." I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. But then I remembered the smug laughter in my living room, the way she had spoken of me, as if I were already locked away in a home for the elderly. My sympathy froze before it could take shape. Walter's message was quieter, almost defeated. "Son, just call us back. We can talk this through. This doesn't have to be the way. Talk this through." For 5 years they hadn't wanted to talk. They wanted to take. Now suddenly, when the tables had turned, conversation was their weapon of choice. Too late. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the apartment. Their voices, once a source of power over me, were now little more than background noise. Every voicemail was proof that they were learning the very lesson they had planned to teach me: powerlessness. I imagined them crammed into a cheap hotel room, the children restless, Bradley pacing, Lauren frantically redialing my number. Their paradise had evaporated, replaced by panic. The house they thought was guaranteed had been stripped from their grasp, and the man they dismissed as too old had outsmarted them. My finger hovered over the screen, tempted to answer just once, to hear the desperation live, but I didn't. Sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. So I ask you, when those who betrayed you finally come begging, do you answer and give them relief, or do you let them sit in the storm they created for themselves? "We'll get lawyers." Bradley's voice thundered through the speaker as I played voicemail number 37. He sounded enraged, almost panicked, like a man who realized too late that the ground beneath him had collapsed. "You can't just sell our house without telling us. We'll drag this into court." "You'll see," I chuckled to myself. Our house, he still clung to that phrase, even though his name had never once touched the deed. The arrogance of a man who had lived rent-free for half a decade, using my utilities, eating my food, raising his children under my roof, and now claiming ownership because entitlement had cemented itself in his bones. I imagined him pacing in a hotel room, veins bulging, the kids restless, Margaret sobbing in the corner. Walter probably sat slumped in a chair, muttering about how everything had gone sideways. And Lauren, well, Lauren would be the one dialing my number over and over, believing that if she pushed hard enough, she could bend me back into the role of obedient father. But no lawyer could undo a clean cash sale. No threats could erase notarized signatures, title clearance, or escrow deposits. James Clark's company had the deed now, and they weren't sentimental about property. To them, this was an investment. To me, it was liberation. To my family, it was the shattering of every false assumption they had built their future on. Elizabeth, my neighbor, called me later that afternoon. "David, you wouldn't believe it. They showed up at your old house shouting, demanding to be let in. The new tenants had just moved their things in." Lauren tried to push past them. I pictured the scene, my daughter red-faced and furious, demanding entry into a house that was no longer hers to enter. "What happened?" I asked calmly. Elizabeth laughed softly. "The new owners stood their ground, showed them the deed, told them if they didn't leave they'd call the police. Bradley was yelling about lawsuits, but it didn't matter. They packed up and left in a taxi, humiliated." Humiliated. That word sank deep. They had toasted to family vacations in my living room, mocked me as gullible, plotted to lock me away. And now they were the ones turned away from the door, outsiders, in the very place they had once ruled like conquerors. I thanked Elizabeth, assuring her I was fine, and hung up the phone. My voicemail buzzed again, message number 38. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. Their threats were hollow, their power gone. For years, I had been the one scrambling to answer every call, every demand, every request for help. Now I had the luxury of ignoring them, of letting silence answer on my behalf. So tell me, when someone threatens you with power they never truly had, do you waste energy arguing back, or do you let the truth of your actions speak louder than their words ever could? Where did you go? That was the desperate question echoing in nearly every voicemail now. The fury had drained from their voices, replaced by bewilderment. They couldn't understand how the man they had written off as weak, gullible, and too old had slipped completely out of their grasp. Elizabeth called again, her voice hushed with disbelief. David, they came back. They're like lost souls wandering around Maple Street. Margaret was crying, saying this had to be some mistake. Walter kept asking neighbors if anyone had seen you. I could almost picture it, my daughter and her in-laws standing on the sidewalk, their luggage piled beside them like refugees. For years they had treated my home as their fortress, the one thing that insulated them from responsibility. Now, stripped of that illusion, they looked like intruders, because that's what they had been all along. Did you give them the storage information? I asked calmly. I did, just like you asked, Elizabeth replied. Lauren snatched the paper from my hand, crumpled it, and demanded to know where you were. I told her exactly what you told me to say, that you'd sold the house, left town, and they'd need to contact you directly. I smiled, sipping my coffee. And what did they do? Elizabeth paused. Bradley cursed so loud half the street heard him. Margaret begged me to call you for them. Walter just looked defeated. But Lauren, she's furious, David. I've never seen her like that. She kept repeating, this isn't fair. He can't do this to us. Fair. That was the word that nearly made me laugh out loud. They had plotted to strip me of my dignity, to lock me away, and sell the very home they called theirs. They had justified betrayal with entitlement, and now they wanted to speak of fairness. They'll figure it out eventually, I said. The storage unit has everything they left behind. They can collect it whenever they want. But the house, they'll never touch that again. Elizabeth's tone softened. David, I know they've treated you poorly, but seeing them out there, it was pitiful. Pitiful is what they called me, I replied, my voice steady. They said I was demanding, entitled, a burden. Now they know what it feels like to be unwanted, to be pushed aside. Sometimes the only way people learn is by living the consequences they wished on others. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the phone buzzing again with yet another voicemail I didn't intend to hear. They could keep asking where I was, but the truth was simple. I had finally gone somewhere they couldn't reach. Not physically, not emotionally, not financially. So let me ask you, if those who betrayed you begged to know your whereabouts, would you reveal yourself? Or would you let them live in the uncertainty they so casually planned for you, homeless in their own city? That's the phrase that kept circling in my mind as I listened to Elizabeth describe their frantic scramble. Lauren and Bradley had dragged their luggage from one cheap motel to another, their children exhausted and confused. Walter and Margaret, once so smug in my living room, now stood in grocery store parking lots, arguing over what little money they had left. I pictured Lauren pacing a cramped hotel room phone glued to her hand as she called me for the 43rd time. Bradley no doubt stormed about the place, blaming everyone but himself, while Margaret wept, and Walter sat silently in defeat. It was the kind of scene I had witnessed in my classroom countless times, students who cheated on a test suddenly realizing their clever plan had collapsed. Panic, anger, denial, and finally silence. My family was learning that same lesson now, but on a scale they'd never forget. Their sense of ownership had evaporated the moment James Clark's company installed new locks. The inheritance they counted on had been reduced to boxes in a storage unit, prepaid for 6 months, and labeled neatly waiting for collection. I had made sure they weren't left without their belongings, but I also made sure they would never again confuse my kindness with obligation. The voicemails had changed tone. Lauren's latest wasn't angry or commanding, it was desperate. "Dad, please, we'll do anything. Just call us back. We don't have anywhere to go." The echo of her words filled my apartment, and for the briefest moment I felt the sting of sympathy. But then I remembered her laughter that night, the way she justified betrayal by invoking her late mother's name, twisting Sarah's memory into an excuse. That sympathy hardened into stone. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was in control. The man they called gullible had turned out to be the one holding every card. My silence had become their tormentor, every unanswered ring a reminder that their safety net was gone. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet, and considered the irony. For 5 years they had lived under my roof without fear of consequence. Now, in less than a week, they were the ones adrift, stripped of comfort, stripped of certainty, stripped of the illusion that they could dictate my future. Homeless in their own city, I repeated under my breath, almost as if grading the final line of a lesson plan. They had earned this outcome, every bit of it. So I ask you, when those who wronged you finally taste the consequences of their betrayal, do you extend a hand of mercy, or do you let them live with the discomfort they so easily planned for you? I was in Hawaii first class. That single thought filled me with a satisfaction no words could fully capture. The irony was delicious. The very paradise my daughter had denied me was now mine, funded not by her generosity, but by the sale of the house she believed was already hers. While Lauren and Bradley were crammed into some budget motel back in Florida, I reclined in leather comfort, champagne flute in hand, watching the Pacific sparkle below. The flight attendants treated me with the dignity my family had long since abandoned. "Celebrating something special?" Mr. Parker one asked, setting down a tray of salmon and fresh fruit. "Yes," I answered simply. "Independence." She smiled, assuming it was some milestone birthday or retirement trip. Only I knew the depth of those words, 40 years overdue, 5 years of being treated as a burden, erased in one decisive act. When we touched down in Honolulu, I stepped off the plane, not as the forgotten father left to watch the house, but as a man who had reclaimed his agency. I checked into the same resort Lauren had once bragged about, the one with private lanes, infinity pools, and concierge service. The receptionist handed me the key card with a warm smile. "Ocean View Suite, Mr. Parker. Enjoy your stay." I opened the door to my suite and stepped out onto the balcony. Palm trees swayed in the breeze, waves broke gently against the shore, and the sun painted the horizon in molten gold. It was everything they had promised themselves and more, but now it belonged to me. My phone buzzed. Missed call number 45, then 46. I ignored them, letting the vibration hum against the nightstand. Each attempt was another reminder that they no longer dictated the terms of my life. They had tried to erase me, but now I was the one writing the ending. Room service arrived with dinner: grilled mahi-mahi, garlic butter shrimp, a bottle of wine chilled to perfection. I raised a glass to Sarah's memory, imagining her laughing at the poetic justice of it all. She would have loved this view, this taste of freedom, and she would have insisted that I savor every second of it, not just for myself, but as a message to those who had mistaken kindness for weakness. As the sun slipped into the sea, painting the sky with fire, I thought of Lauren's words. "You're too old for such adventures. Too old." My glass caught the last rays of light as I took another sip. No, I wasn't too old. I was exactly the right age to prove them wrong. So let me ask you, if life handed you the chance to stand in the very place your betrayers said you'd never belong, would you let bitterness consume you? Or would you raise a glass and savor the victory Independence Day? That's what I called it, when the champagne glass touched my lips at 30,000 feet, and the celebration hadn't stopped since. While my phone filled with missed calls and voicemails, I reclined in paradise, tasting freedom with every sip of wine, every breath of ocean air. From the balcony of my resort suite, I watched the surf crash against the shore. Couples walked hand in hand, children built sandcastles, and honeymooners toasted to new beginnings. I wasn't bitter watching them, I was vindicated. My own new beginning had come not with fanfare or family support, but with a pen signing away the house they believed was their ticket to security. The voicemails had shifted tone again. Bradley's latest was almost pitiful. "David, come on, this isn't right. You've made your point. Just call us back." As if this were some childish spat, not 5 years of exploitation finally being answered. Lauren's voice carried desperation. "Now, Dad, please, we'll fix this. We'll do anything." Their words once would have softened me, but now I let them play like background noise while I ordered another round of grilled ahi and papaya salad. The hotel staff treated me like a man of respect, not a burden to be tolerated. The concierge greeted me by name each morning, asking if I'd like another excursion booked. I smiled politely, declining. I didn't need helicopter tours or luau's to feel alive. Simply sitting in peace with no demands, no dismissive laughter, no one treating me like I was invisible, that was paradise enough. One evening, I walked barefoot along the beach, the sand cool beneath my feet as the sun dipped low. I thought about Sarah. She would have stood beside me hand in hand, her laughter rising with the tide. For a moment, grief pressed heavy on my chest. But then I realized something profound. By reclaiming my dignity, I was honoring her. She would never have allowed our daughter to treat me as disposable. My actions weren't just revenge. They were justice for both of us. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Missed call number 50. I pulled it out, watched Lauren's name flash across the screen, then fade to black as the call went unanswered. 50 times they had tried to reach me. 50 times they had learned the sting of being ignored. How many times had I answered their calls for help? How many times had I sacrificed so they wouldn't struggle? Now the roles were reversed. Back in Florida, they were learning that when you betray someone long enough, eventually the silence becomes your only reply. So let me ask you, if those who discarded you begged for mercy, would you give it freely? Or would you let them sit with the weight of consequences until they finally understood respect? Elizabeth's call sealed it. I had just returned from breakfast at the resort, fresh pineapple banana bread and coffee so smooth it almost felt like a sin when my phone rang. The number was familiar, my neighbor back on Maple Street. I answered, already guessing what news she might carry. "David," she whispered, excitement trembling in her voice. "You should have seen their faces." I leaned back in my chair, letting the ocean breeze drift through the open balcony doors. "Tell me." "They came back this morning, suitcases and all. Walked right up to the front door like nothing had changed. Lauren was the first to try the handle, but of course it wouldn't budge. New locks, new owners. When the couple living there opened the door, Lauren pushed forward, insisting it was her house. Can you imagine? I closed my eyes, savoring the image. And what happened? Elizabeth chuckled softly. The new owners didn't budge. They showed her the deed right there in the doorway. Told her to leave before they called the police. Bradley started shouting, threatening lawsuits. Margaret was crying. Walter just kept shaking his head, saying, "This can't be right." And Lauren, she looked like she'd swallowed glass. The satisfaction coursed through me, steady and sharp. For years I had been their safety net. They assumed I would always absorb their mistakes, their arrogance, their cruelty. Now they were the ones standing outside, powerless, humiliated. Elizabeth's voice softened. She asked where you were. Demanded to know, actually. I gave her the storage unit address like you told me to. She crumpled the paper in her fist and stormed off. I laughed quietly. Good. Let her be angry. Anger is easier to face than the truth that her father was never as weak as she believed. They've been calling nonstop, Elizabeth added. Lauren's practically begging. Bradley's furious. David, are you really in Hawaii? I walked onto the balcony of the Pacific, stretching endlessly before me. Yes, Elizabeth. At the very resort they thought I was too old to enjoy. Ironic, isn't it? She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Sarah would be proud of you. I think she'd want you to know that. Her words hit me harder than all the voicemails combined. Sarah would have stood up for me when Lauren didn't. Sarah would have never allowed them to mock me under my own roof. And now, in a way, I was standing up for her too. After we hung up, I poured myself another cup of coffee and let the silence settle. Their humiliation was complete. Their inheritance had vanished. Their burden had proven himself far heavier than they ever imagined. So tell me when you hear that those who betrayed you are finally facing the shame they deserve. Do you rush to ease it? Or do you sit back and savor the justice of silence? 5 years of exploitation balanced. That's what I whispered to myself as I sat on the lanai of my suite, watching the ocean stretch endlessly into the horizon. For half a decade, my daughter and her husband had siphoned off my savings, drained my patience, and chipped away at my dignity. Every grocery bill, every utility payment, every roof repair, they had taken it all for granted. Now, in one clean stroke, the scales had finally tipped back to even. I thought about those late nights when Bradley had come begging, his voice breaking over the phone, claiming he'd lost everything. How quickly I had opened my door. I thought about Lauren insisting that housing her family was temporary, while 5 years passed without a single offer of repayment. And I thought about Walter and Margaret smiling smugly, as though my home was their rightful inheritance. All of it had been written off as kindness on my part. But kindness has limits, and they had mistaken mine for a lifetime guarantee. The math teacher in me appreciated the symmetry. Roughly $60,000 I'd poured into them over 5 years. Roughly $60,000 trimmed from the house sale to make sure the deal closed before they returned. Equal and opposite, just like a balanced equation. Justice, not revenge. At least that's how I framed it for myself. Still, I couldn't deny the quiet thrill of knowing they were now huddled in some dingy motel room while I enjoyed the very paradise they thought I was too old to handle. They had wanted me silenced, tucked away in a nursing home. Instead, they were the ones silenced, ignored, unheard, stripped of control. I raised my glass of wine toward the fading sun. Sarah, this is for you. My late wife would never have tolerated their betrayal. She would have stood in that living room and cut them down with nothing more than her sharp, unyielding voice. I lacked her fire in that moment, but I had found my own weapon, patience sharpened into strategy. My phone buzzed again, voicemail number 52. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. Their words had become predictable anger, panic, begging threats. None of it mattered. Paperwork mattered. Deeds mattered. The law mattered. And all of those were now firmly on my side. For the first time in years, I felt light. The burden I carried wasn't my age or my loneliness or even my grief. The burden had been them. And now they were carrying the weight themselves. So let me ask you, when the balance finally tips in your favor after years of being taken for granted, do you see it as revenge, or do you see it as justice finally paid in full, the burden disposed of them? That phrase echoed in my mind as I stood on the balcony of my Hawaiian suite, waves crashing below the sky, painted in streaks of orange and pink. For years, they had treated me like a weight dragging them down something to be managed, ignored, or discarded. And yet in the end, I was the one who had cast them aside calmly, legally, decisively. Elizabeth's last update still played in my thoughts. Lauren had tried one final plea, her voice trembling with desperation. "Dad, please answer. We'll do anything. We have nowhere to go." That single line told me everything I needed to know. The balance of power had shifted completely. They were no longer the confident manipulators, but the abandoned, the powerless, the ones left scrambling for shelter. I thought back to that night, when I heard their plan through the vent. The word nursing home had nearly broken me. But instead of collapsing, I had listened, calculated, and acted. That was the difference between us. They mocked, they schemed, they relied on arrogance. I relied on patience, timing, and the law. Walking through the suite, I paused at the dresser where I had placed Sarah's photo. I picked it up, running my thumb along the frame. "We did it, Sarah," I whispered. They thought they could erase me, but I erased their entitlement instead. I could almost hear her laugh, warm and approving, carried on the ocean breeze. The phone buzzed again, missed call number 55. I flipped it over without looking. They had once been the center of my world, the people I answered to at all hours. Now they were background noise, and I intended to keep it that way until I decided otherwise. In my mind, I pictured them leaving the storage unit, their belongings stacked in boxes, their pride in tatters. Bradley cursing, Margaret sobbing, Walter silent, and Lauren realizing that her father had slipped completely out of her control. The house they believed would secure their future was gone, and with it, the illusion that they could dictate my life. The lesson was complete. They had wanted me to vanish into obscurity, tucked away in a care facility. Instead, I had chosen my own exile on my terms in paradise free. I raised my glass once more, the golden sunset reflecting in its surface. "To independence," I whispered, taking a slow sip. And with that, the last traces of guilt melted away. "So let me ask you, if you were branded as a burden by the very people you sacrificed everything for, would you fight to be included in their world? Or would you cut them out entirely and build a new one for yourself?" Looking back now, I don't see what I did as revenge. I see it as reclaiming my dignity. For too long, I let my daughter and her family believe that kindness was weakness, that silence meant surrender. But silence, when paired with patience, can be the sharpest tool of all. They thought they were planning for my future, locking me away, cashing out my home, erasing my presence. Instead, I planned for theirs. I learned something powerful through this experience. Family is not defined by blood alone. It's defined by respect, loyalty, and reciprocity. When those are absent, titles like daughter, son-in-law, or in-law mean very little. Age does not make us useless. If anything, it gives us wisdom to outmaneuver those who underestimate us. If you are a parent, I urge you, don't allow yourself to be treated as a burden. And if you are a child, remember the sacrifices your parents made deserve honor, not exploitation. One day the roles will reverse, and you may find yourself learning the same hard lessons you once forced on them. So tell me, have you ever experienced betrayal from your own family? How did you handle it? And what lesson did you carry away from it? Share your story in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening. Your time and reflection mean more than you know.